Welcome to the podcast. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Clem, and this is Turns Out We're Gay.
We are so excited about today's episode. We are welcoming our first guest for season 2 of Turns Out We're Gay. Today we're going to be chatting to a queer therapist and sexologist, Kendall Buckley, who is a sapphic specialist and ADHD therapist. She's got a background in clinical nursing. She's got a Bachelor of Science in nursing and a master's in sexology. She's also a radio host and many, many other interesting things. Today's episode is going to get really heated in the best way possible. If you're interested in hearing about queer sex and so much more, definitely listen in and say welcome to our guest, Kendall. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
How are we?
We've had such an awesome conversation leading up to this. I feel like we could have filmed the last 2 hours and it would have been the best podcast ever.
Just set up cameras everywhere and it would be fine.
The chaos of our cameras. And our phones.
There are a lot of them.
Where?
I feel like I'm live on air.
Live on air with Turns Out We're Gay.
Yeah. Good morning and welcome to Turns Out We're Gay.
We're going to use that as our intro from now on.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, I've done an introduction, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to come on and chat with us today?
Well, let's be honest, you stalked me.
I did.
I've never felt so, what's the word? Like vulnerable professionally. Just like we found her. It's so great. Anyway, so I am a sexologist. I specialise in sapphic relationships, but generally speaking, I cater to the LGBTQA plus / flinted community. Do you know what flinter is?
You do. I don't.
You don't?
I don't. I said no before, but you said I do, and I was like, oh,
I thought you said yes.
So I learned it when I was in Berlin. It's the literal translation. So it's female, lesbian, intersex, trans, and agender. So basically it's just anything except for cis men. So that's basically who I look after. But I find that most of the time people that come to me are gender or sexually diverse and mostly AFAB. So if anyone doesn't know what AFAB is, so assigned female at birth. I do deal with a couple of AMAB patients, but there always has to be a queer element for me. And so be it that they're having sex with other men or there's some element that makes it queer. So I specialize in the queer community because just like you were describing when you were looking for a therapist that is queer and you couldn't really come across someone that looked like a person you would want to go and talk to about your sex and relationships, it's like that's missing. And when I was looking for someone, couldn't find someone, so I was like, oh, I'll just do it then.
I love that.
That's so good.
I love it.
Yeah. and just it ended up being that just everyone that comes to me is that. I sort of also ended up specialising in ADHD and autism because of that. So like I mentioned before, most people, they have one or the other. Neurospicy in some way, shape or form. So, yeah.
And for those listening, we did ask Kendall which one of us might have a bit of ADHD and autism.
strategically taking a sip of the drink.
Strategically declining to answer.
Just start sculling the bottle.
Not quite
Can we
sure.
get some gin in this? No, I'm joking.
What led you to sexology? Obviously, you were a clinical nurse previously, and
Yeah.
then you went and did your Masters of Sexology. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So I'd always been interested in sex, and I thought originally that I wanted to be a midwife, and then I realised that I wasn't at all interested in babies whatsoever. I was just interested in how they were potentially made. Started my master's and just really loved it. And just to be honest, I started it because I didn't think I'd get in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I didn't think I was going to be smart enough. I didn't think I'd get accepted.
Oh, I'm sure you are.
I am really smart. I am really smart. I realised. Do you know it took me like 2 degrees and like, I don't know, like a master's on postgraduate to be like, oh, Kendall, you are actually smart. Like, it's like, it took me that long, 8 years of full-time study, full-time work and a master's to realise, I'm actually pretty smart. But in the same time that I did the master's, I also got diagnosed with ADHD myself. So I was like, I navigated that entire 8 years. And it was like the last year and a half that I got a diagnosis. So I managed to do it all.
Oh, my gosh. I think that's what I struggle with, which is probably why I might have ADHD. But just the concentration when it comes to study, I constantly shift off. It's so hard.
Yeah, I find, but if you're interested in it, you're probably really focused on it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
true.
because you're getting dopamine.
True. That's
It's
very
much
true.
like sex, which is why we're actually here.
Not psychology.
No, but you get those little dopamine
Yeah,
fixes. So,
yeah. Well, let's just jump straight into porn then.
Oh, sure. Let's go for it.
In my stalking,
Yes.
I mentioned that you had been on the Delphi panel study, but let's not go into that. Let's go more into like your interest in education within porn, and that's something that you were over in Berlin recently doing.
Yes, and that was just a really convenient way for me to go and watch porn for an entire week in a crowded room. Surprisingly, only one person was caught wanking.
Oh,
Wow.
Yeah.
Was it you?
No, it wasn't me. Do you know, it's so interesting. You would think at the porn festival, you'd think that there would be a lot of straight people. There wasn't. It was like an entirely like queer audience, and all of the films that I went to go and see were entirely made of queer people. So
I love that.
Had like a couple of friends, 3 friends actually, that had pornos in the festival. A couple of them won awards. One of them was actually from Melbourne. It was just, it was really amazing, but a really great space to go and watch like actually ethically made inclusive porn with all sorts of different bodies and shapes and sizes and abilities and all that sort of stuff, which is generally what I would recommend anyone watch if they were going to consume any porn.
it's so fascinating, and I'm really keen to chat more about this because I think there is a really good place for ethical porn and sex work and those types of things.
Yeah,
and I don't think
absolutely.
it's talked about enough.
I think today is International Sex Workers Day, by the way.
Oh, there you go.
I think today is,
Oh, cool. I just don't think it's talked about enough.
No, it's not. And I think, especially in Australian media right now, there's a lot of chat about the dangers of porn. And I think it was Tanya Plibersek that said something about, in particular, she really bagged anal sex, for example. She was like, our children are watching people with BDSM and anal sex. Like, anal sex is the worst thing that you can ever do. Like, it's not. It's really pleasurable. But anyways, like that, it's just like sort of demonizing a particular type of sex act. And it's like, well, that's just not really helpful. And I think, I can't remember who it was, but someone was like, let's just make it so that like kids can't access porn, or we need to raise the age, or we need to reduce like for harm reduction. But it's like, that's actually just not helpful. Like, what you need to do is just teach people porn literacy. It's like teach people that prior to, and I was chatting with one of the porn stars when I was in Berlin, who did this amazing scene with a trans guy whose porn, it's so amazing. It was this Polish guy that made it and had like his mum and dad in the film. Like, it was like this really beautiful experience of gender euphoria. And there was this really amazing porn star that was in it called, I think his name is George the Obscene. He's like so beautiful. But they were doing chats after, because that's what happens at the festival. So they'll show the film, and then afterwards, like either the filmmakers or the actors or whatever are in it, and they'll do like a Q&A. And so it was really interesting because when you go and you actually listen to sex workers, people that actually do the job, people that actually make the porn, and they will tell you exactly what they do. And they specifically spoke about this scene where this beautiful trans guy is getting fucked by George the Obscene. And like, they were talking about how prior to having sex, they were like, because George is also a sex worker and a therapist actually as well.
Oh,
yeah. It's just,
wow. I want to have a chat with George.
Tell me all about it. And it's much like how anyone should theoretically in best practice navigate sex. Like, what are you into? Like, what do you like? And learn from sex workers who I think, in my opinion, are the OG sexologists, because they're the OG teachers of sex. And, back in the day, that's where people used to go to learn. Like, and they're the best people to go and understand about STIs and transmission and all of the rest of it, because they're doing it every day.
Yeah.
Like, literally. So why wouldn't you ask them? What I'm going on to say is that prior to the scene, because they didn't want it to be entirely scripted, they had, and this happens in most cases, it happens in all cases in good porn. It's like, what do you like? What don't you like? What's off limits? What's good? What's not? Like what are your boundaries? So that it can be more natural. And I think if you think about any time that you've had sex with someone, if you have those conversations, one, it's arousing having that conversation, because you're like, we're talking about sex and this is hot. And then that's your little human sexual response cycle. So you're talking about it. So you're getting all titillated and exciting. And then when you're actually like doing the act, you're like, well, we've already had this conversation, so I know that this is something that this person is into.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been a big part of our sex life is communication. I think we communicate a lot about what we like and don't like, and it's definitely made our sex life. We have quite a healthy sex life, I would say.
But we also didn't meet for a good 6 weeks or so. So I think it forced us to sort of have those conversations. And by the time it actually came, no pun intended.
I was like just so into like listening to you that I was like, oh, there's a pun there.
I didn't mean to, but no, but by the time it happened, we had all of those conversations. So it made the initial time a lot more smooth than it should have been initially.
Yeah.
Distance does make that easier because you do have to talk about those things, I think. Even things like politics, values. Like if you're in some kind of long distance things, it's like, this is going to be a lot of effort or it's going to be really expensive in terms of flights. So I need to know, is this thing that I'm potentially investing my time and money in actually worth it? But then, then when you do finally get to see each other. Do you know what I think is really funny about, though, when you go long distance? You have all these chats and you get super aroused, right? And you're like, oh, this is so saucy. And then you arrive and then you're like, you're so emotionally intimate with each other because you've had all those chats, but you're just not used to like physically touching each other. And then you're like, oh, it's like brand new again. It just like takes you back.
I think for us, though, our first date, I don't know.
We had a way of avoiding that kind of moment, but we kind of agreed that the first time we met was kind of going to be quite a sexual moment. So Sarah was going to be in lingerie in the bedroom kind of thing. So
interesting.
I ended up ruining it by surprising her at the airport because I thought she's going to be more comfortable if we've at least met face to face. So I picked her up, drove her to the thing, went back to work and came back later. So we'd had that, awkward little first kiss and how do you put your arm around each other and things like that. But then our first sort of like time together was walking into a hotel room and seeing that goddess.
Interesting. Oh, wait, so you went to go to the airport, but then she wasn't there?
No, she came to pick me up from the airport and I told her not to. I said I wanted to meet you in the apartment.
Sure.
And she surprised me at the airport and long story short, I ran away.
Oh my gosh.
I literally ran away.
Literally.
But
like dropped bags, ran.
I ran.
What a scene. Like, this is like not the romantic review.
And I hate attention. So in that moment, I was just like, who's she running from?
Not me. I'm here for you. But I think it was just because our connection is so intense and was so intense leading up to it that I just had this like perfect picture in my brain. And when she was standing in front of me, I was like, well, fuck, what do I do now? And so I ran.
Yeah, so interesting.
But we only, she picked me up and then we went for a drive to the apartment and she dropped me off maybe 40 minutes tops together. And then the next interaction was me on a bed in red lingerie and Clem walking in and the rest is history.
I love that.
Yeah, so we skipped a lot of that sort of awkward, how are we going to start, that sort of stuff, and like who's going to make the first move and stuff. It was just kind of like drop the bags.
Yeah, so I guess that's the art of communication and figuring out that is what really works for you. For me, that wouldn't work for me because I have more of like a responsive desire. So like I really enjoy like the bits leading up to it and the tension and the flirtation and the staring and you don't know where this is going to go and you're just like, and you're just like, I'm like, you're just like clawing at things. I really like that. So for me to go straight into it, I'm like, I like the build. So I think, but that's where communication happens. So if you can talk about that and you're like, this is what I want and this is what I don't want, then perfect.
Yeah. And we did communicate about that particular moment for like weeks.
Yeah, I think the build was the weeks coming up to it because we knew that was happening. So it was sort of like, oh, and what are you thinking when this? Like we kind of had that build up in that way.
But you hadn't met.
No.
Love that.
Yeah.
I love that for you. Yeah. What if you what if you like met each other, right? And you didn't like how each other smelled? Do you know, like,
that is a great
question. Because like smell is a big thing for me. And I've like flown places to meet people before and one time it didn't go out so great, but then the other time it's been really great. But
well, actually you were worried about kissing.
Yeah.
Oh.
The first kiss, like proper kiss, if that doesn't like kind of go smoothly or if it just doesn't feel natural, it's like a big issue for me.
But Clem, you can learn.
No, you can, but I don't know what it is, but I think when you first have that, like, I guess, hookup kind of kiss, if there's not that, like, I don't know, excitement,
Sure,
then it's,
that's
so
what
it
you
was,
mean.
yeah, it's definitely not like, oh, if you're a bad kisser kind of thing. It's just more if,
But what if they were?
well, that would probably be a bit of an ick.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah.
Luckily you weren't.
And you liked how each other smelled?
Yeah.
I think so.
I think actually, do you know how I know that she liked how I smelled? Because she went and bought me the same perfume that I was wearing on that day.
Oh.
It's my favorite. Well, it's not my favorite. It's your favorite perfume.
So now you wear it.
So now I wear it all the
So
time.
now you wear it all the time.
Because she loves it. So that's how I know you liked how I smell.
What is the perfume now? I want to know.
It's just Ariana Grande.
Why that made me laugh?
No, but I feel like it makes the story so much better.
I had like a Gucci bottle, I had a Calvin Klein bottle, but that day I was wearing Ariana Grande.
Do you have a thing for Ariana Grande?
No.
Oh, just like
Definitely not.
I've had a few people say, like, what are you wearing? I'm like, oh, Ariana Grande. And they're like, I would never. How could you? That's like $30 from Chemist Warehouse. I'm like, exactly.
That's precisely
$30
why I wear it.
from Chemist Warehouse.
Why wouldn't you?
Just a quick spray over. It does the trick in the bedroom. I can tell you.
Well, it does, evidently. Yeah, that's fine.
Oh my God. Okay. We've gone way off track. Talking about perfume. But the reason why we wanted to bring you on today is obviously we did the Bees and the Bees last season, and that episode, believe it or not, is our second best episode.
Stunning.
Which we were really nervous about putting that out because we're
Okay.
obviously talking about our sex lives. I think we apologised to our parents about 15 times throughout that episode. But we had a lot of really interesting feedback from our audience around like particularly your story with meds, and we had messages about toys and sex anxiety and things. And so a lot of our audience really loved that conversation. We also had a lot of people say, why didn't you tell us more about your sex life?
Yeah, why don't you tell us more?
And that's why you're here.
I feel like we just did, didn't we?
It is little teasers.
Oh
that's
gosh.
fine.
Yeah, I think it's an important topic to have. Like, I think talking about sex can be fun and natural and easy. And I think making this episode with you as well here just allows us to put that content out there for people. So I'm so excited. We're going to go through some misconceptions, sex health. I really want to talk about toys and porn today for some reason. That's where my brain
I'm vibing it.
I'm vibing
What's your
it.
porn category that you search for?
I've got a few.
Do you?
Yeah, I don't know, but it's definitely all lesbian and
Is it?
has
That's
been.
so interesting because most lesbians don't watch lesbian porn.
Really?
that.
Yeah, most don't.
Why do you think that is?
Because it's usually very performative,
Yeah.
and depending on where you get your porn from. Like, because if you're just doing a cheeky porn hub, like I just want to bat myself off just for like just a quick dopamine fix. So you're just like, I need to do it quickly, so I need some visual stimulation. Most people, they just don't watch lesbian porn because it's usually for men. So it's usually very performative.
Yeah.
And I find I really struggle to watch it because I'm like, that's not how we have sex.
Yeah, that's
Like
true.
and especially if someone's got nails, and it's not like, as you can see, I don't have nails.
And there's a reason.
And there is a reason. Anyway, do you know I saw something the other day? It was like these really killer nails, and then it just had like 4 pussy. Like just these like, I was like, oh, I really want that. Like, but imagine going to your nail technician. Could you just write 4 pussy, like just on my
Or just spell it out.
FORPUSSY. Do you mind? Yeah, if you could just do that. The poor nail just imagine nail technician just being like, she fucks with this.
I'm actually considering it. That would be cool.
Or just like FP.
FP.
Yeah, we'll make it a trend.
Yeah.
And like only the
FP
lesbians will
rather than
know.
pussy, if it might be a bit
I
embarrassing.
just, for a whole second, I forgot I'm in the corporate world, so I probably can't do 4 pussy. But
or people,
I could do
people are just
FP.
like, why have you got those ones missing?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've just been going
well.
short.
Funny thing
Turns
was-
out.
Turns out I'm gay.
Have you seen my podcast?
Got a podcast. It's amazing.
This all came from your porn category.
Yeah, what porn categories?
I think where this came from is because I was in a hetero relationship for so long. So that was my I'm not looking at hetero porn. I'm looking at queer porn or lesbian porn because I was in a hetero relationship, and I think that's just continued. I don't know
Yeah,
if that
right, that's
if that
fair.
makes sense.
It does. I think it's really interesting though, because if you watch queer porn, it is very different to your sort of normal Pornhub porn. Like it's just very different. And the things that are featured, you know, sometimes it's really strange things. Like I remember I watched one and it was just these two sort of like non-binary people, AFAB people, and it was just really intimate and it was really fun, and it just kind of showed what it's like when you've got two gender non-conforming people being in a dynamic together and like the intimacy and the sexiness of that. And then there was one part where they were in like a baseball field and it was empty, and they just like both ended up with their hands over the rails, and then they both ended up just pissing over the rails. Oh. Like just this really just this strange and intimate things that AFAB people do with each other that you just wouldn't do in a heterosexual dynamic. That's just a really left of field example. But just like showing the variation in ways that people actually are intimate with each other. And sapphic sex in particular is very left of field. It's not sort of scripted, and the ways that we are intimate with one another are so varied and quite bizarre sometimes, you know, like to just normal penetration and licking things. So, yeah.
You're right. Like it is very theatrical, and it's probably the word I'm looking for. Like it's a show. No. I meant like Pornhub. Theatrical is the word. No, but I told you we say words that aren't right, and we either just push through and hope everyone else got it, or we just laugh about it. But it's like a show, you know, and it's not real. And I think that's the same hetero, queer, whatever, when you go to a Pornhub and things, you know, you're looking at something that might not be what happens in the real life world.
I always like to ask people what their porn categories are, because I think it's a really, like I know it makes people uncomfortable. And so I like to just ask them. And because I used to be really uncomfortable. People are really embarrassed, but I like to ask people because I watch like gay male porn and all sorts of different things, and like sometimes even age play stuff. Like, you know, even that, this is going to sound like, I'm hopefully going to affirm some people, right? Because I think most people are like, oh my God, I can't believe you watched that. That's so embarrassing. But you know, that porn, and it's always like family ties, right? You know how that's really popular on some categories, like the most popular category. I'm not interested in watching families fuck each other, just to clarify, right? But you know when they're going to get caught, that vibe. Yeah. It's the, I'm going to get caught, like I shouldn't be doing this, and it's like this naughty thing that I shouldn't be doing. And so when I tell people that, I'm like, well, that's why I watch it. But you know, if like you're into your stepsister, then like, good on you, but like I'm not into that.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but there's so many different things that people watch, and I think as long as it's fantasy, or you just like, people just get really embarrassed about categories that they watch or things that they enjoy. I talk about it.
What's your category, babe?
Mine, it's actually interesting. When I was hetero or with a guy for 9 years, I actually watched gay male porn.
We were talking about this the other day.
And I think because I didn't like hetero, it was just kind of me being like, oh, well, because, you know, if I'm into guys, like, then there's two guys, like, surely that's, like, better or whatever, like, to try and convince myself that I liked penis, I guess. Like, just put more in there. But now it's definitely... just put more in there, sorry. Just chuck more in there.
Just get it all in, yeah. Stick.
Literally, like, this makes me more straight for sure.
Definitely.
On thinking about it, probably not. Now it would be, two female identifying women, but it's kind of skewed away from that more performative stuff when I was trying to figure it out, because that's all I could find, to now I'll usually look up something like strap or, you know, a STEM or mask and femme, that kind of dynamic, because I find that I can get more real lesbians in a sense, or people that actually identify as lesbian, and it's a more sentimental kind of connection. Yeah. So that's probably what I look up now, more of like the strap stuff, or whether it's a dynamic that you would stereotypically find in a lesbian couple, because I find it's the most common to be an actual connection in that sense.
That sounds like demisexual vibes to me. I deal a lot with demisexual people. But I'm not saying that you are, but people like to have a connection with someone before they get sexually aroused. So that's quite a common thing.
Yeah. Would you say that's me? Based off my history.
Based off your history. Good question. I think that you need a connection for it to be good sex.
100%.
For it to be like really enjoyable. And I think that's where our sex life is so great, because we have such a strong connection and we communicate, and, you know, we're not just thinking about how do I get her to come? Like, we're actually
Yeah.
thinking about all the other things that I know that you like, don't like, leading up to that point, and post and all that kind of stuff. I do think you can go and have sex with someone and it not be a connection, but I don't know if you necessarily do it for the enjoyment of doing it or if you're doing it more for validation.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I would never get, well, not never, but I would very rarely get pleasure myself physically. I get a lot of pleasure, like, mentally from doing it. Like, I can do sex as just sex, but it will usually just be the pleasure of giving kind of thing.
Which sort of leads me to think about one of the questions that I always ask my patients is, why do you have sex?
You know what's funny? It's not funny. It's actually kind of sad. But when I was in a hetero relationship, and correct me if I'm saying these terms wrong because I am always learning, but when I was in a hetero relationship, I really didn't like sex. Like, I actually...
Gay.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah. Turns out I'm gay. Even just like penetration, all that kind of stuff, I really didn't enjoy it. It took me a very long time to figure out what I did like, what I didn't like. And then coming out as gay, obviously I love it now. But I have, for me anyway, it's about not just a connection with my partner, but I love the pleasure that comes with it mentally, physically. I feel very sexy. Like, it makes me feel a lot more connected to my body. And also I think as well, being queer now, it's very validating. Like, that's what I like. And going down on a girl, I love it. If I was doing that to a guy, I'd be like...
I love it.
Yeah, love it.
I'm
Love
there
it.
with you on that, yeah.
So yeah, I think for me it's validating, but for very different reasons. It's like physical, mentally, emotionally, and pleasure is a big thing for me. And we've had a lot of conversations about this recently. It's like being able to have sex as one topic and your relationship as another.
Yeah.
And sex being so important that I believe it can't just be one-way street for the rest of your life. You know, constantly exploring, constantly looking at it as its own beast, as well as your relationship and what goes into that. And we've been talking about that quite a lot recently.
Yeah.
It is definitely something that requires maintenance. So the only thing I would kind of throw in is that they're not really separate, because you can't really have one without the other. And so what tends to make good sex, and if we were to dissect your sex life at present, and what's so great about it is that there is that connection, there is that communication, there is that intimacy that's there. And I saw the way the two of you are when you're together, and there's like sweetness between the two of you and just your general interactions. And that's not like you're just focused on those things when you want sex. It's like that's happening all of the time. So like John Gottman, he would call that like love maps. So the things that you're doing in between when you finish having sex and then when you are potentially going to start again, like keeping that fire stoked, you know, so keeping it there and keeping things like sweet and like complimentary, whatever your love languages are, like however it is that you show affection for one another, all of those things effectively build and then make it easier to transition rather than it just being like hot, cold.
Yeah, 100%.
Or switch on, off.
Yeah.
And so if you keep the connection and the intimacy and the communication and you keep all of those things happening, there will be periods of time in your life where you can't have sex due to medical conditions. It could be medications that you might be on. It could be surgeries that you have to have. You might have had a death in the family. You might be grieving. Someone could have a child. Sex doesn't happen all the time, but being connected and intimate with your partner and caring about them and, you know, keeping things up like physical touch if that's something that's really important to you, and not putting pressure on our partners to have sex, like that is a massive thing. Like, you know, there's nothing worse than someone being like, why aren't we having sex? Why aren't we doing this? It's like, that's the first thing that you're just like, well, the last fucking thing I want to do is have sex with you right now when you're telling me that we're not having sex. Like, do you know what I mean? It's like, and like I've had situations like that happen where I'm like, I've just had surgery. Like, the last thing I feel on my vulva, the last thing I feel like doing is having sex right now. It's like I've switched that part of my brain off. But if you're concentrating on all of the connection and everything else that leads up to it, then even if for some reason that can't happen, it just makes it easier to go back to that, like the transition to go back to it, because there are always periods of time, you know, where we can't have sex, but maintaining that connection and intimacy is the most important thing.
Yeah. And I think that happens in our life now. Like, there are some time we go weeks where we're just doing this all the time, and we'll lay there and we'll be like, when did we have sex? It was like 2 weeks ago.
But how do you define sex also? Like, how do you define it? Because this is very tricky to do when you are in sapphic dynamics.
Yep.
And I recently had a conversation with some people about this. What makes sex for you? Because me being pushed up against a wall in a kitchen and having a quick snog, that to me is just a continuation of that. Like, that's just your foreplay, so to speak. Like, you're just building up to it. The flirting, all of these things. Is sex only that you're penetrating each other? Is it only that you've got each other's faces in each other's vulvas, like, or in butts and things like that? Like, what is it that actually means sex to you? Like, is it dry humping on the couch? Like, does that count as sex? Because sometimes, like, yeah, if you were to navigate open or poly dynamics, it's like, well, what does that actually mean?
Good
like,
point.
what does sex actually mean? Like, what are the actual acts that mean that to you? And so sometimes having a conversation when you're talking about sex and communicating about it, it's like, okay, well, what does sex mean to you? Like, how do you actually define queer sex?
I'm looking to you because I'm talking a lot.
I don't know. I think it changes sometimes.
Yeah.
And with different partners. Mine probably would be more like when you get the vulva involved,
Yeah.
whether it be fingers.
Get the vulva involved.
Yeah. I come out with some strange sayings. You get used to them.
I thought you were going to say Volvo. Get the vulva involved in the Volvo.
No, but I think when there's fingers or
Right.
tongues or something down there, for me, that's sex in my mind in a women loving women sort of environment. But it's been different with different people. Like some people, you know, it's a very different dynamic with the dry humping or something, and it can almost be just as pleasurable or whatnot.
Well, I mean, you can get someone off by just dry humping.
Exactly. So I think I've definitely had situations like that where it's a very different sort of environment. But for me, yeah, that's how I would generally sort of describe it with women.
And some people it would be different. You know,
Exactly.
like dry humping on the couch could be it, you know, because for some people, they don't like penetration or they don't like actually receiving. So there's lots of different things that can, change. So it's important to get that definition.
Yeah.
Like, what do you consider sex?
Definitely. And I will just add, like, it's not just penetration for me. It's just literally any sort of stimulation in that area. Or, I mean, as well, like, I guess.
What if you just got your titties stuffed?
That's what I was just thinking. I was like, well, I guess if someone was like, if you're shirtless, in my mind, that's probably still sex. Like, you know, getting intimate in that sense. But I don't know.
And obviously this episode is about queer sex.
Yeah.
And so it's important to discuss like those nuances and what is defined as queer sex. And that really varies from person to person, which is why if there was to be one overarching theme or one thing that anyone was to take from this episode, it would be communication, but not just in the sense of like knowing what it is that you like, knowing what it is that the other person likes or doesn't like, and then being able to get comfortable to say what it is that you want. Because a lot of people might know it, but they're not used to having those conversations, like negotiating sex, saying what it is that they like, or having those. A lot of people are just still very anxious and nervous to even have those conversations. They just sort of fumble about and they're like, yeah, that's nice, or it's not. Like, and it's like, or even just learning things like, say, for example, I'm a sexologist, right? So you'd think I'd be pretty good in sex, saying like, yes, do this, no, don't do that. I've learned within myself that I'm just not very good in the moment because I have ADHD. So in my self-awareness, I'm like, right, I've got ADHD. I get too overwhelmed with too much that's happening that I find it very difficult when I'm in the heat of the moment, because I get sexual anxiety as well. That's one of the most common things that people come to me for. It's like I'm trying really hard to be mindful and to like stop those intrusive thoughts that sometimes get in the way of pleasure and sometimes get in the way of orgasm. But I'm really good at having those conversations before sex and after sex. And so I'll say to people, I'm not so good in the moment because I find it quite distracting and it can really pull me out of being in a pleasure state. But I will always tell you before or after, or, you know, if I moan in a particular way, or I might arch my hips in a particular way, or I'm responding, or my body responds in this particular way. Like, these are different ways that I'll communicate. So it's not necessarily just touch me here, do this, do that, because some people just aren't comfortable doing that. But it's also knowing that you aren't comfortable doing that in the time, or you're just overstimulated, which is like a really normal thing to happen. But then still being able to communicate and go, well, this is what I will do in that situation, and me not saying something, because it's a lot of people I think are like that. They just get a bit shy, or like me, so many people have some sort of neurodivergence and they're just literally overstimulated and then they just can't communicate it at that time. And that's not a bad thing, but then learning how to communicate before or after and then having those conversations, that's really important. Most people, I would say, are getting better, but a lot of the time people still are viscerally uncomfortable to even talk about it. And so sometimes it's just getting people comfortable to do that. I mentioned to you before about the yes, no, maybe checklist that I'm in the process of making. So that's something that I would give to people as a prompt to be like, why don't we fill this in together and then we can learn things about each other and kind of go from there.
And I think this is a big thing right now, is that communication before sex. Years ago when I started having sex, it definitely wasn't something that I would even think of, like having a conversation and saying, I actually don't like it when you do that, or I do like it when you do this. And for me, it was anxiety around like offending somebody, thinking they aren't doing a good job, or also not knowing what I like and don't like at the time.
Yeah,
and
it's pretty difficult to communicate what you want if you don't know what it is.
Yeah, what I wanted was
a woman.
Could you just say that in the middle of it?
Do you know what? I just feel like this isn't working because you're not a woman.
I'm so sorry.
Like, this is wild.
Yeah.
Just
Is there a vagina in the room?
yeah. Can I please have one of them instead?
Please and thank you. And that's why I really wanted to have this conversation, because I think it should be, it's hard to say it should be normal. To some people it's not normal, it's not natural to have those conversations, but I'd love for it to get to a point where you can just sit down with your partner and say, this is what I like and enjoy sexually. Like you said, in the time I can't have that conversation, but I want to have this conversation now so we can try and grow and evolve as our sex life evolves.
I think as well, and that's a reason to go to a sexologist if you do find it really difficult to talk about sex. It might be something that you need to unpack. Or, you know, there could be a great psychologist that is quite, because even amongst health professionals, people just aren't necessarily comfortable talking about sex. And that takes a lot to kind of unpack. Like, why is it that I'm not comfortable talking about sex? Is it because, you know, my family shamed me my whole life for even possibly thinking about engaging in any kind of sex? Did you grow up in a massively Christian background? Were your parents completely just like not affectionate whatsoever? And then you just, the only way that you consumed information was in like the dolly sealed section. And so you're just so, and then all of your friends, if you went to, I don't know, like I know a lot of people that went to same sex schools in particular seem to like have this like fear of talking about it because it's something, I don't know, maybe it's the religion. I went to a public school, I was poor, so like so we all talked about sex because everyone was shagging.
It's funny
we shagged the private school boys, like that's what we were doing.
It's funny that you mentioned the dolly private sealed. I literally brought it up in the first episode. I think I said that was like, I used to have magazines and like a dolly magazine and I would unseal it and like
the
read
best
through it.
feeling.
I know. And I'd ask my mum for a dolly magazine. I swear every week she'd be like, why the fuck do you want this? And I'm like,
it's the sealed section. I don't know if they have anything like it anymore.
I don't think so. Surely not, especially with like current times around like what is exposed. And so I think back then maybe when you're a child it maybe wasn't as like regulated, but I was definitely here for the dolly
sealed section.
Sealed
I think
sections.
just kids are now on TikTok.
Yeah, well, true.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah,
True.
like, so they don't need a sealed section. They just need their phone.
What's your thoughts on people coming out into, like they're in the early stages of coming out, they've never been with a queer person before and it's their first experience. What's your thoughts around that, and I guess the best way to kind of guide that experience for them and figuring out what they like, what they don't like, and how scary it might be?
I think for the most part, just being honest. The key to good sex is your capacity and ability to also be vulnerable. And sometimes it's just saying I'm a bit scared, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Like, I've never done this before, but I really want to do it. Like, sometimes it's just being honest about that, because faking it is not a vibe. Like, people can pick up on it. Just be honest. A while ago, I wore a strap for the first time, right? And I was like, I'm scared. Here's me. I specialize in sex, right? I was like, I've actually never done it before. And I did it a while back And I was like, I just said that. I was like, I'm uncomfortable. I'm just going to do it though. Like I'm physically uncomfortable doing it, but I'm going to do it and we're going to do it together. It's going to be fun, but I'm scared. And what happens when you say to someone, I'm scared? Someone's like, it's okay. I'll walk you through it and it'll be fun and we'll do it together. And then you bond over it and it's nice and it's sweet, but it's more honest than like faking it. If I had gone in there like,
swinging it around,
swinging a dick, like, right. But I mean, it would have been like funny, but still,
Oh my gosh.
it just wouldn't have been as genuine. It wouldn't have been as nice. Now I'm really good at it, but a femme top, anyways. You like to talk about top bottom switch energy.
Yeah, let's have a chat about that. I think I was pretty vocal in previous episodes where I thought I feel like it's too categorized at the moment, and I love the fluid. We spoke about you being a top for the most part, but you're quite fluid and same.
You're also a top.
No, I'm
is
not.
That what you're saying?
No, I'm not a top.
You've
but
definitely
fluid.
got some top energy about you, though.
I would say I'm dom femme is probably yeah. I think I give top energy in some ways, but for the most part in the bedroom, definitely more so you're in the top.
That's quite a common thing, someone that's quite dominant in life usually likes to be quite submissive behind.
And I'm the
closed doors.
reverse.
Yeah.
As you can probably tell from
I
the setting
can,
up, I'm like, I'm fine, whatever.
I was like, actually, that dynamic doesn't surprise me.
Once the doors close, Clem's a different person. Clem's whipping out the
Got
straps.
the strap,
Backpack.
you're ready to go whips and chains. No, but going back to top, bottom switch, that originates from BDSM. So like obviously we're talking about this sort of like dominance and then submission and then like when you're one way in public and then another way behind closed doors, like those things sort of change. Like that top bottom switch, it stems, like that's where it originates from. So you would be topped and then you would be a bottom, but it's also got links and ties to like gay male sex. So whether or not you would be a top, so whether or not you would give or whether or not you would receive. So it's very much, or a verse, so verse, VERS, which effectively is switch. But it's just those sorts of things because being queer very much has always been linked in some way. We've always sort of had like ties to kink, like leather daddies and all of the rest of it. Like those things, just the lexicon and like language that we use is just sort of like merged and then it becomes these identities, if you will. But I feel like because in a way TikTok is so popular right now, everyone just labels everything. And so, like black cat, lesbian and golden retriever, and you can sort of subcategorize people in different things. But sure, like if someone identifies as that, then fill your boots. Like if that's how you want to identify and that gives you a word to describe your experience, like fill your boots, like that's great, but it doesn't have to be, it's not prescriptive. Like, and just like with your gender and your sexuality, like the way you identify is the way that you identify. The way you behave, it can be entirely different. So you could be predominantly a top, but then occasionally you switch. Or, previously I would have thought that I was like a bottom, and then I realized, because I just didn't understand until I actually had someone that I was seeing that was exclusively a top. And I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. I was like, I'm used to giving, and I was very uncomfortable. And I was like, I don't know what to do with this. And this person was like, oh, no, not for me. And I was like, what do you mean not for me? What? What do you mean not for me? What?
What do we do now?
What do you mean? And then that's when I learned like that there really are just tops. And I was like, I don't like that.
Well, that's
like for me personally, because I'm a switch, evidently. Like if we're really to get cameras, as evidenced by my strap-on story, but like
I think that's the struggle that I have, and I think social media has had a really big impact on those dynamics of being a firm one way, and we're seeing a lot on social media where it's almost like this presence of that's who I am, and I'll be offended if you sort of even suggest that I might receive or I might give, or and it's such an interesting thing. And I think that's what I was talking about in the Bees and the Bees, where I think it'd be nice to, in your own time, in your private space, really like dig deep, and maybe you do want to have a girl between your legs, who knows? But actually, like, I wonder if social media has formed those more like firm.
Yes and no. I mean, I feel like that terminology has historically always existed. You know, you think back in the 90s, the words that we would use to describe, say, perhaps, you know, like a butch lesbian is considered, like, amongst some folk, like, to be the OG non-binary person.
Yeah.
Like, that's sort of like where that kind of stems from. Back in the day, the language was just different. So you would have butch and femme, and then, like, over the course of time, it just changes. I think with the world being the way that it is and everything is online, it's like it just put it all on crack. Like, it's just all happened really quickly. And, like, the different words that people use have just evolved over time and become more specific and more nuanced as like time has gone on, but it's always existed. It's just more readily available. Like, if you look, I think there's a really great Instagram page that I follow called On Your Knees, and they often, which I love because I love anything that, like, takes you back in time, right? And so they'll have, like, queer classified ads, you know, like butch leather daddy seeking femme, like, bottom. So, like, the words have always existed. And so what it is that people are describing is like, I want to do X, Y, and Z to you, and this is how I am. So we've always had that language as queer people. It has always existed. But the one thing that will always happen within and amongst queer people is that lexicon always changes. Like, languages that we use will always change. The words that we're using now, people will in 20 years' time go, oh, like, this is the words that they use. Like, they won't exist. They'll have evolved. And also, language changing was a means to keep ourselves safe as well. And that's oftentimes with any minority groups, language changes to keep ourselves safe and so that people are excluded. But people sometimes just don't realise that that's what they're doing or why they're doing it, because it's just something that's happened and evolved over time.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it'd be interesting to see how things evolve with social media just continuously evolving in itself, and what we've seen, especially through COVID. Like, I think we were saying the other day the amount of 30 plus women that came out during COVID saying that they were queer. It's just like a thing. So yeah, I think, like you said, having that readily available material and then naturally just gravitating to that and holding to that and then making that your own identity or whatever that might be. But yeah, it's definitely something we see a lot, and I'm glad you brought it up. I did not know it was terms that were from BDSM. I had no idea.
Yeah, that's where it, like, originated.
Yeah.
And then just it kind of bleeds into community, and then it just sort of gets adopted, and then people are like, that's like any language. Like, sometimes people say to me, there's so many words for so many things now. Oftentimes it's heterosexual people that say this, and I'm like, but if for your whole life you never had a word to describe your experience, and then one day a word like non-binary appears, and it perfectly describes your experience as a human, and finally there's something that fits with that feeling of you just not quite being like, I'm not this and I'm not that, but that's me. Who cares if there are 5,000 words to describe an experience? If that can make one person or 10 people feel like they belong and that their identity and somehow is being identified or, like, recognized or seen or heard, then that's going to, even if that just creates a community of 10, and then those 10 people find each other on TikTok, that's you finding community, and that's really important. And so, like, who gives a crap about anyone being like, there's too many words? It's like, well, don't learn them, Roger. Like, just stick in your lane. Like, no one's asking you to be non-binary, or no one's asking you to be a top or a bottom. You're probably a bottom, you little bitch. No, I'm joking. The point is,
It just kept spiraling.
I was there with Roger.
Roger really pissed you off. Any Rogers listening to this, suck it.
I like to use the name Kevin as well. I don't really like that name, but anyway. Sorry to any Kevins out there. Anyway, you get the point. But so, like, whatever words, like, if someone needs a word to describe their experience, like, if especially in the context of, and this is historically quite a common thing for some people, when you're looking at, and I know at some point we're going to talk about gender and sexuality, but not in today's episode, but sometimes people don't want to receive, and that could be because of trauma. And so if someone is like, I'm a top and I don't receive, that's something that you would want someone to be able to communicate safely, but you still need to be able to communicate. So by having these labels, it gives us a shorthand. But then if someone doesn't understand, like, what does top mean to you? Does it still mean that you receive, or just only occasionally, but you mostly like to top, or X, Y, and Z? It just gives people a pathway to understanding and them and the person that they're with. But most importantly, like sometimes people even say to me like, oh, I'm this. I'm like, but what does that mean to you? Sometimes people come in and give me therapy speak. And I'm like, define what that is to you. Like, who cares about the word, but what's your experience of that? What does that mean to you? Because that changes for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I know we're taking up a lot of your time today, but I have a couple more things I want to talk about on this episode before we wrap it up. I want to talk about toys because I think for me anyway, I felt a lot of shame growing up. And this didn't come from anyone like making me feel weird about using toys, but I was very much like, oh, I need to keep this a secret. I need to hide it. Like no one can know about it. Yeah. And growing into myself, also meeting Clem and having, you know, open communication about toys and it just being a part of our sex life or not. Like you can and you can't use it. But when I was coming out, I was like, well, I need to figure out how to use a dildo on someone. Like, I don't know how to use that. Or like, I need to have all these toys. And then I guess as I've grown into my queerness, I've realized that you either don't need toys at all or toys can be a lot of fun. And I think there is a lot of currently still people feeling either they need to use toys a lot or they don't, or they're still feeling quite ashamed of using sex toys. What's your thoughts on that from, you know, sex health and even just like with your patients that you've had come across?
I mean, I would examine why anyone feels shame around it and question sort of where that idea or rhetoric has come from and just sort of examine that within self. It's just not really cool to shame anyone for needing something to get off or enjoying something from any sexual perspective. Like a similar shame is experienced around the need for lube. Like there are just a lot of assumptions that are made, like you shouldn't need to have this or you shouldn't need to require X, Y, and Z, which I just say that's bull crap because whatever you need to get you off is whatever you need to get off. And I think that unless you are wanting to work with a sexologist or a sex therapist to perhaps find different ways for yourself to get off because you had a problem with the fact that you became just so focused on that being the only way that you could get off, but you weren't happy with it and you wanted to change it. Come and see someone like myself and we can work with different masturbation exercises to help get you to focus more on like eroticism and mindfulness and those sorts of things. But if it's not a problem to you or your partner, why change it? Like until it's a time that you need to change it, you don't need to change it. And use toys if you want to or don't. Like some people use them, some people don't. I just don't think that shaming anyone or yucking someone's yum is necessarily helpful for anything. Like sex is weird and awkward and funny and like messy and that's just life, and just use whatever you need to get off. Like there's no shame in that whatsoever.
I love the yucking someone's yum. I think I've heard that once before and I'm obsessed with that now.
Yeah.
That's going to be my new...
Don't yuck my yum.
Yeah.
And if someone says that, just be like, whatever.
Don't yuck my yum.
Yeah.
You're in trouble.
Yeah.
You
it's
are...
like a new, like slay. Like it's like a new
slay. Don't yuck my yum, okay? I don't want to hear it.
But yeah, look, use whatever. And like sometimes as well, because a lot of the work that I do is with people that have ADHD, or they come to me a lot of the time because they've got sexual anxieties around sex. I was literally talking about this today. Those like mind-blowing full body orgasms, like some people can have them all the time, right? I can't have them all the time. I get two in my head. I've got intrusive thoughts. I've got anxieties, especially if you're with a new person. Like all of that is a lot for a little ADHD brain to manage, or sometimes even any brain. You don't even have to have ADHD or an undiagnosed ADHD brain. Anyway.
I feel like you were looking right at me.
I was. Anyways, I'm joking. I'm totally joking, but am I? No.
Come see me after this.
I can't diagnose you. I am not trained in the DSM-5, but it takes one to know one. I'm joking. Peer reviewed. Anyways, but the point is, I can't remember what I was saying because I've got ADHD and I got off track. Don't yuck my yum, okay? Anyway, so what was I saying? Not everyone has those full mind-blowing like body orgasms all of the time. Those things take time and setting and patience and being fully aroused. Like it doesn't happen all the time. I don't want to say you shouldn't, but try not to shame yourself for whatever isn't happening. Like whatever's going on in your life, there are so many factors that will influence your ability to experience pleasure. Like mental health, stress is like the number one reason why people have difficulty experiencing pleasure or may have a reduced libido or whatever. So it just really depends on what it is. And if you need something to get you there, then get you there. Or also you don't have to get there all the time.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like there is so much more we could talk about on this topic, and I think we're going to have to bring you back on in the future to revisit all of this. We're going to have you for another episode where we're going to talk about sexuality and gender, which I'm really excited about. But in the meantime, is there anything else you want to add to this episode? Any tips you could suggest to couples or solos around spicing up their sex life or anything like that?
I think just going back to that big take home is communication. That would just be the biggest thing. And just to remind people that your libido will fluctuate throughout your life, and that's perfectly okay. And if you need additional help, then you know where to go.
Well, that was my next thing is where can people find you? I think that's
so you
great.
can find me at kendallbuckley.com, and I will, once I've finished it, make the yes, no, maybe checklist available. And there's also, if anyone is interested in it, there's also a masturbation exercise that I have for people. So it's very much about solo pleasure. And I've adapted it to, so it's very much like it involves wearing a strap and just sort of like this, it's just really fun. And most people really love it when I give it to them and they're like, oh, they just find out new things about themselves. So
Amazing.
I can make that available too.
Amazing. We will have that all on the podcast and also on our TikTok, YouTube, Apple Podcasts. Where else are we now? Instagram. We're everywhere at the moment. Thank you so much for joining. I'm sorry for being all over the place.
It's okay, me too.
And yeah, if anyone wants to reach out to Kendall, make sure you go check her out. It's been an absolute pleasure and I can't wait for you to be on the next episode. If you took anything away from this episode that you want us to revisit or you'd love Kendall to talk about, please let us know. I think Kendall will probably be a staple in the show.
I'm happy to be back anytime.
She doesn't have a choice.
Now,
You don't have a choice.
Forever guest.
So
I can be a resident sexologist.
Well, there you go.
Oh, she's offered it now.
Done.
We've been waiting.
This whole time. You're the only one. This is it.
I've
found you. We
stalked
found
you.
you.
But yeah, anyone in the audience, if there's anything that you would love us to talk about, or if you want to talk to Kendall directly, like I said, go to Kendall. But if you'd love to hear it on the podcast, please message it in. We are a safe space. Everything that's messaged to us is confidential. And yeah, we'd be happy to talk about anything, I think. So yeah, you let us know.
Perfect.
Perfect. Get ready. 1, 2, 3.
Love you.
Bye.
Bye.